case which you're about to see is a fictional one, but the procedure is legally accurate. The characters are played by actors, but the jury is selected from members of the public.
I shall give shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth.
Mr. Brackenbury, what is your Christian name?
George Charles Brackenbury.
And where do you live?
14 Glebe Crescent, Fulchester.
And it's right, is it not, that the accused, Mrs. Hibberd, lives next door at number 16?
Yes, and Mr. Hibberd too, until, you know.
Yes. Now, I believe you moved to number 14 in 1966?
That is correct. It was in the August.
And did you meet Mr. and Mrs. Hibberd soon after you moved in?
Yes, I went round to look them up. Mrs. Hibberd answered the door, and he came up behind her. I said that I'd come to live next door, and he said he was glad that I'd come round because he wanted to ask me would I do something. I said, what was it? And he said, would it be all right if they had their milk delivered to us?
Now, did he say why?
Well, yes, he said he couldn't have tradesmen calling at their house because he didn't want his wife preying on them.
So you had hardly introduced yourself as the new neighbour before Mr. Hibberd said to you in front of his wife, the accused, that she was the sort of person who might prey on tradesmen.
Yes, and 'twas in front of his daughter Joy, too. She was there. Well, I thought I'd better tread very carefully here, so I hedged. I said I'd have to ask the old Dutch. Matter of fact, I used the word wife. I wanted to introduce a little respect into the proceedings.
And did you agree to have their milk delivered to your house?
Well, no, Your Honour. At the time, it seemed to me like getting into deep water.
Now, let's be absolutely clear about this, Mr. Brackenbury. Did the accused ever, to your knowledge, behave in a way which might suggest she was the sort of person who would prey on men of any description?
Well, no, not a bit of it. As a matter of fact, over the years, I noticed that she never even spoke to a man without her daughter being present.
So that accusation against Mrs. Hibberd was, as far as you were concerned, completely unjustified?
Oh, yes, I would say so. But let's be fair, it was the only time I ever heard him say that sort of thing in front of her.
Yes. Now, Mr. Hibberd was in fact employed in the branch of what is now the Department of Health and Social Security, to which you have been transferred.
Yes, that is correct.
Yes, and he was a clerical officer. Were you already an executive officer?
Yes, I was.
I see. Working together?
Well, no, but it wasn't a very large office then, and I pretty soon got to know everybody. Of course, it's different now with unemployment being as it is.
Yes, so you got to know Mr. Hibberd pretty well?
I would say so, yes.
And his wife?
No, we didn't see very much of her.
Not in 12 years. It is 12 years since you moved in next door to them.
Yes, Your Honour, but it seems that by the time we moved there, their marriage was in a state of suspended animation, I call it, if that's the right word.
Suspended animation?
Well, yes, it was so nearly dead that you wouldn't know that it was alive. They led entirely separate lives.
Well, didn't they go out together? To the cinema, perhaps? I mean, social functions?
Not to my knowledge, no.
Well, did they go out on their own then, separately?
Well, Reg did, yes. He attended all the functions of the Bowls Club. He was the treasurer, you see, but Violet, well, I suppose she may have gone out occasionally with her daughter, Joy, but I really don't know.
Well, did Mr. and Mrs. Hibberd go on holiday together?
Not in my time, no.
Well, did either of them take holidays?
Reg, yes. Violet, no. She was a bit of a home bird when it came to holidays.
Well, did they do any weekend shopping? You know, the sort of thing so many couples do together.
No, my wife and I met Reg quite often in the supermarket on a Saturday, but never with Violet.
So he was on his own?
On his own, yes.
I see. Did Mrs. Hibberd then do her own shopping?
Not usually. No, Joy did it. Sometimes she did. Yes.
Joy, her daughter?
Yes.
Yes. Well, supposing they needed something for the house, did they go out and buy that together?
No, I don't remember them ever buying anything for the house. There was nothing new in it.
One gets a picture of a very frugal lifestyle, Mr. Brackenbury. Would that be correct?
Yes, Your Honour.
You've told us all the things Mrs. Hibberd didn't do, Mr. Brackenbury. What did she do? I mean, with her time.
Well, to be frank, Your Honour, I don't think she did very much. I mean, she never left the house, really. She kept that clean, of course. It was always spotless, but I suppose she listened to the radio, and she had her daughter Joy for company.
Yes, I see. Thank you, Mr. Brackenbury. Yes, Mr. Dugdale.
Honour. Now, Mr. Brackenbury, you've told us that you didn't see much of the accused in the last 12 years, but you got to know Mr. Hibberd because you and he worked together?
Yes, and we used to go to church together on Sundays. He was a church warden, you see, and I became one later when the vicar got to know what I was about, and then he'd like us not come round to Sunday lunch.
Well, Mr. Hibberd used to come and have lunch with you and your wife, but Mrs. Hibberd did not?
No, but that was just because of the way things were between them. The poor devil hadn't had a slice off a nice roast in years.
I see. Now, what kind of person is Mr. Hibberd?
Oh, an excellent clerical officer, very good at his job. A little eccentric at times, like the rest of us, but a highly respected member of the community. He was a magistrate for many years, treasurer of the Shepley Bowls Club, a man that anybody would trust, and very good with figures. He used to organise the summer camp for the Fulchester Boys Club, an asset to the community.
Yes, I see. Now, it's right, is it not, that in 1976 Mr. and Mrs. Hibberd did in fact embark on divorce proceedings?
Yes, Reg told my wife and I that, but it was kept generally very dark.
And did Mr. Hibberd in 1976 obtain a decree of divorce, decree nisi, on the grounds of 2 years' separation and consent?
I believe so, yes.
But shortly before the decree of divorce was made absolute, did Mr. Hibberd suffer a stroke, as a result of which he has been paralysed ever since?
Yes, as a matter of fact, he had 2 strokes. He was just beginning to get over the first, and he had the second.
Yes, and has he been deprived of his power of speech?
Oh, yes.
Usher, could you ask for Mr. Hibberd to be brought in now, please? Now, I believe that after he'd suffered his stroke, Mr. Hibberd was cared for almost a year in a private nursing home?
Yes, his son paid for that, I believe.
Yes, that's their son, John, an officer in the Merchant Navy.
Yes. There's always a silver lining. It was poor Reggie's misfortune that enabled John to come home from sea after many years, I understand.
Yes, and when John returned to sea, was Mr. Hibberd returned home to live with Mrs. Hibberd again?
It seemed proper at the time.
Now, when was that?
Oh, that would have been last August that Reg came home.
That's August 1977?
Yes.
Yes. Mr. Hibberd is, of course, quite helpless.
Oh, yes. Yes, Violet couldn't even get him out of bed without assistance.
So he was entirely dependent on her?
Oh, for everything.
Entirely in her power?
Yes, you could say that.
This is Mr. Hibberd, is it?
Yes, Your Honour. If his chair could be brought down to the front of the court. Now, I think you, Mr. Brackenbury, initiated a particular weekly practice after Mr. Hibberd had been brought back to live at number 16 Glebe Crescent?
Yes. Since Reg could still hear, it seemed to me there was no reason why he should miss Sunday services. He never had missed them, except when he was away at the boys' camp. So I used to pick him up on a Sunday and take him along.
Now, was there any Sunday when you noticed something about Mr. Hibberd?
Yes, I noticed a red mark on his wrist.
Which wrist?
The right one.
Yes.
I pulled up his cuff and I saw that the mark went right up his wrist. So before I took him home, I had his jacket off and I opened his sleeve and it went 6 inches up his forearm.
Yes. Now, was it regular in shape, this red mark?
Well, it was as if he'd been badly scalded, as if something boiling had been poured over his wrist.
Now, when was this, Mr. Brackenbury?
Oh, this would have been April the 9th.
This year?
Yes.
Now, did you say anything about these marks to anyone?
Well, yes, when I got him home, I asked Violet how he came by them.
And what did she say?
She said that she had tripped whilst she was carrying a kettle and Reg had been splashed. Well, I looked at old Reg, but of course he couldn't tell me anything. There was a funny look in his eye, but, well, I couldn't make head or tail of it.
So you took the matter no further?
No.
Now, did something else happen before long?
Yes, I noticed that Reg was always crying towards the end of the service, just before it was time to go home. At first, I thought it was just the service.
Yes, then what?
Well, then he was crying one day when I went to pick him up, so I asked them why this was, and they said that he didn't like his medicine.
They?
Joy and Violet.
Yes, I see. Now, when was this?
Oh, this would have been in June, the 11th, second Sunday.
Now, did you go to church that day?
Yes.
And?
Well, Reg kept on crying right through the service, tears streaming down his face. I took him off into the vestry, and I asked God to show me what was wrong, and he did. I happened to notice that Reggie's socks were down, so I bent down to pull them up just for something to do. I was at a loss. And I noticed that his shin was red. So I took his socks and shoes off, and his feet were red. So I had all his clothes off then, down in the vestry, and his entire body was inflamed right up to his neck. So I took him straight off down to the casualty ward at the General Hospital, and they told me there that it looked like acid burns, as if he had been bathed in acid.
Mr. Brackenbury, would you just show us the scald marks you mentioned on Mr. Hibberd's right wrist?
Yes.
No, you'll have to come out of the witness box.
Mr. Dugdale, couldn't this have been done with photographs? I mean, it seems a pity to subject Mr. Hibberd to this...
Yes, Your Honour, the photographs of the scald were lost, I'm afraid, and as their loss only came to light this morning, this seemed to me to be the best solution. I mean, to have Mr. Hibberd brought here.
I see.
There we are.
Now, could Mr. Hibberd be wheeled over to the jury so that they can see? I hope you can see that, members of the jury.
There we are. It's faded a good deal, but it's still there.
Now, the discoloration from the acid bath, or whatever it was, that's disappeared altogether, has it?
Oh, yes.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Brackenbury. You can go back to the witness box. Could you take Mr. Hibberd over there?
Maybe we release poor Mr. Hibberd now?
Your Honour, I think we may need him again, especially when we come to evidence the accused.
Assuming the defence call evidence.
Oh, yes, Your Honour, but also I believe Mr. Hibberd has himself expressed a wish to remain here.
I thought Mr. Hibberd had been deprived of the power of speech.
Yes, he has, Your Honour, but his son John believes that he can communicate with him.
Then could Mr. Hibberd not give evidence through his son?
No, Your Honour. No, there's such communication as there is between John and his father is too imprecise for that.
I see. Well, let's get on with it, shall we?
Now, may Mr. Brackenbury be shown Exhibit 1, the bundle of photographs? Members of the jury, if you don't mind sharing, there are 6 bundles for you. Now, will you look at photograph number 1, Mr. Brackenbury? Does that show the acid burn on Mr. Hibberd's body?
Yes.
Yes. Now, when were these photographs taken, do you know?
Oh, these photographs were taken on the day that I discovered, in my presence. You can see here where the colour of his skin changes at the neck.
Yes. Thank you, Mr. Brackenbury. Now, you said that after you had taken Mr. Hibberd to the public hospital, you called the police. Now, did you then go with Detective Sergeant Roundtree to number 16 Glebe Crescent, and did you there see the accused?
Yes, and the sergeant said that he'd just come from the hospital where Mr. Hibberd was being treated for what the doctors thought were acid burns, and could she help with that?
And?
Well, she called out to her daughter and fell in a faint.
Now, what did she call out?
She called out joy and then help, and that was all before she fell on the floor.
Did Joy come?
Oh, yes, and I went into the kitchen to get a glass of water. By the time I came back, she was coming to.
Now, did the sergeant question the accused further?
Yes, he asked her again, did she know how it was that her husband's skin had become inflamed all over?
And what did she say?
She said that she had put caustic soda in his bath water by mistake, instead of bath salt.
Now, did you do something as a result of what she said?
Yes, while the sergeant was still questioning her, I went into the bathroom to have a look.
And what did you see?
I saw a tin of stuff for cleaning drains.
What was it?
Caustic soda. Alkali.
Now, may I be shown Exhibit 2? Is that the drain cleaner you found?
Yes, that's it.
Was the accused asked about this?
Yes, the sergeant asked her if this is what she had put in her husband's bath water, and she said that it was.
Yes, can you just read the warning on it?
Yes, there are 2. Here, under the trade name, it says, caution, this substance is caustic. And here on the back, there's another warning which reads, corrosive causes burns. Avoid contact with the eyes, skin and clothing,
Yes.
and in case...
Yes, thank you, Mr. Brackenbury. Did you find anything else in the bathroom?
Yes, I found some bath salts.
I may be showing Exhibit 3.
Those are they.
And as we can see, the containers don't look anything like each other, do they? I mean, one is a round tin and the other is a cardboard packet.
Nothing like.
Nor do the contents?
Oh, no, these crystals are white and the bath salts are blue.
Was the accused shown the bath salts?
Yes, and she said those were the ones, all right.
The ones she claims to have confused?
Yes.
Yes. Now, I think at that stage of the inquiry you dropped out and left matters to the police.
Oh, yes, well, I know my job and they know theirs. At least we must assume they do.
Quite. Mr. Hibberd, I believe, stayed in the Fulchester General Hospital until he'd recovered from his burns.
Yes, they said it was quite a weak solution, just enough to burn like Jiminy, but not do any harm.
You mean serious harm, don't you, Mr. Brackenbury? It must have been agonising, see?
Yes, Your Honour, it certainly burns if you get it on your hands.
And was he then moved to a nursing home, and has he been there ever since?
That is correct, yes.
Yes. Now, Mr. Brackenbury, if you can help with this. You've told us the sort of life that the accused and her husband led. Now, did the accused ever make any complaints or manifest any resentment or hostility towards her husband? In your presence, I mean.
Well, there were a couple of rather funny incidents.
Now, when were they?
Oh, they would have been during the year before Reg had his stroke, at 1975, that would be.
Yes, now, what happened in the first incident?
Well, she came into the office and applied for Social Security.
On what grounds?
She said that her husband had not been giving her any housekeeping and she had nothing with which to buy food.
And what happened?
Oh, well, of course it caused a great stir in the office. And the manager managed to get her into his room and sent for Reg and me.
Yes, now, I think there was a conversation between the manager, you and the accused before Mr. Hibberd arrived.
Yes, she said that her daughter Joy was off sick, that she had asked her husband for money and he had refused, and that she had nothing in the house for herself and Joy to eat.
Yes, and did Mr. Hibberd then arrive?
Oh, yes. Yes, and very heated it was too. I'm afraid that things were said that never should have been.
By whom?
By Reg.
What did he say?
Well, he called her a dirty, lying bee and said that she just made the whole thing up just to embarrass him.
And did she deny this?
Well, she didn't say anything after he'd arrived.
So what happened?
Well, the manager advised her to go down to the Citizens Advice Bureau.
And did she pursue her application for Social Security?
Oh, no, that was the end of the matter.
I see. Now, when was the second incident?
Well, it was about 2 months later. I was in the garden and Joy and Violet came out. She said that she knew what was going on at the church and that he was going to get some of his own medicine now.
Now, did she explain what she meant?
Yes, she said that he had been taking money from the collection plate.
Did you do anything about that?
I did, yes, for his sake. I told her not to say anything about it to anybody and I'd keep a watch on him.
And did you?
Oh, yes, for a month I saw to it that we did the same rows and I kept my eye on that plate.
And was he taking money?
Of course not, no.
Did you take the matter any further? I mean the fact that Mrs. Hibberd had made this unfounded allegation.
Well, no, Your Honour, I didn't. She'd been behaving so oddly, I thought it best to turn a blind eye.
Now, in what way was her behaviour odd?
Well, as I've said, I didn't see very much of her, but there was the occasion when I was behind her at the queue of the fishmongers, and I don't think she knew I was there. But she asked him for a bit of fish for the cat.
Yes, what was odd about that?
They didn't have a cat. I mean, that's all. I just thought it was rather odd.
Yes, I see. Thank you, Mr. Brackenbury.
Mr. Brackenbury, what you saw from your vantage point as a neighbour over a good many years was a marriage which had broken down to the extent that it was nothing really but a shell. They had nothing in common.
No, nothing except the same roof.
Do you know whose idea it was to get a divorce?
Oh, 'twas Reg's, yes, so he told me.
And the decree was by consent?
I believe so, yeah.
Do you know whose idea it was not to go through with the divorce?
Well, that was Reg's again. That was the last conversation we had, the day before he had his stroke.
You're saying that that's what he told you?
Yes.
So that my client, as far as you're concerned, was pretty neutral on these matters?
Yes.
Passive, would you say?
You could put it like that, yes.
Now, Mr. Hibberd, you said, had certain eccentricities. Amongst them was a sort of obsessive desire to denigrate women.
I wouldn't say it was obsessive, but I admit he certainly had very little time for women. He used to have a saying, "Women are troublesome cattle to deal with." That was one of his favourites.
Yeah, well, there was an occasion, was there not, when a young clerical officer got engaged and Mr. Hibberd caused an uproar by his remarks?
I remember that, yes. I don't know who's been telling you these things.
Well, we have our sources of information, Mr. Brackenbury. What did Mr. Hibberd say to the young man?
Oh, he said that if he should have to go away, he should take his wife down to the police station for safekeeping. The unfortunate thing about that was that the young man's fiancée was listening. You know what it's like in an office.
Went further than that, didn't it, Mr. Brackenbury? Didn't he say, for a woman, marriage is the crown of life, but for a man, it's a blooming funeral? And then he made his remark about police stations. And then the young man said he didn't think he'd have that sort of trouble with his fiancée, to which Mr. Hibberd replied, did he not? That's what I thought when I married my wife, but it turned out to be wrong. All women are prostitutes at heart. That gives an indication, does it not, that Mr. Hibberd was positively vindictive towards women?
Well, I don't know what you're referring to. Reg certainly never said those things. Well, not before me, anyway. said one or two unfortunate remarks, yes, but we're none of us perfect, and Reg is no exception.
Of course. The important thing about these remarks that Mr. Hibberd made is that they give an idea of his state of mind, his attitude towards women in general and his wife in particular. At the same time, there's nothing to say that Mrs. Hibberd got to hear of them, and therefore to resent them.
I should think it's extremely unlikely that she did. I mean, she wasn't in contact with anybody from the department, except me, and I certainly didn't say anything. Quite enough wrong with that marriage without... leave well alone, I say.
You didn't think you ought to try to get their marriage back on a proper basis?
Well, no, Your Honour. I mean, people's marriages are their own business, aren't they?
Now, having heard about your father's stroke, Mr. Hibberd, you came home, back to England, and met your parents for the first time for what?
It's 36 years. As I say, I was a baby when I went to Canada.
You missed the divorce proceedings and so forth?
Oh, yeah, that was all through by the time I came back.
And you took a year's leave, so I understand it, to help look after your father?
Yeah. He made a bit of a recovery at one time. He'd even talk a bit, you know. And he had another setback. I'm still hoping there might be some improvement again.
You can still understand him to some extent?
Well, I reckon I can get the gist of what he wants. Sort of son's intuition, if you like. I was asked if I could communicate with him well enough for him to give evidence, but that's just not on, I'm afraid. There's a lot of guesswork between me and Dad. Well, he hears all right, but the feedback's not so clear.
A pity. He would, of course, be the best witness in this case.
Right.
Yes. Yes, Mr. Doctor.
Your Honour. Now, I believe that in the autumn of 1977 you had to go back to Singapore in a bit of a hurry, is that correct?
Yeah, my company got a bit impatient and told me to report back or else.
Yes. And shortly after you left, did you hear from your mother that she was going to look after your father at home?
Yeah. Well, to be honest, I couldn't go on paying the bills at the nursing home. There'd been some trouble over the mortgage that I had to help out with, too. And he was going to have to be moved somewhere, so she suggested having him home, which seemed sensible enough.
Yes. Now, having left in the autumn of 1977, you remained abroad, I think, until about June of this year, when you got a telegram from Mr. Brackenbury?
That's right, yeah.
Yes, and as a result, did you return to England and visit your father?
Yeah.
And did you then visit your mother, the accused?
Yeah, the day after I got back, June 20.
And what did you say to her?
Well, I said that I knew that their marriage hadn't been all that great, but I didn't see that that was an excuse for torturing a man when he was helpless.
And what did she say? Did she deny that she had been torturing your father?
Oh, no. No, what she actually said was, if you only knew. Oh, John, if you only knew what it's been like.
The case of the Queen against Hibberd will be resumed tomorrow in the Crown Court. Mrs. Violet Hibberd is on trial charged on 2 counts, having caused actual bodily harm to her paralysed husband. The prosecution allege that on one occasion Mrs. Hibberd deliberately poured boiling water on her husband and that on a second occasion she put caustic soda in his bathwater. Mrs. Hibberd has pleaded not guilty to both charges, alleging that both incidents were accidents. Mr. Dugdale, counsel for the prosecution, is still examining her son John.
Now, you told us yesterday, Mr. Hibberd, that for very many years you had little contact with your parents.
That's right, yeah. I was shipped off to Canada with an aunt when the war broke out, and somehow I never came back.
How was that?
Well, just after the war, things were pretty hard back here, what with rationing and everything, so it was decided I should stay where I was. Then there was a quarrel about something, and my aunt and my parents stopped communicating, so I more or less stayed put.
Until 1976, when your father suffered his stroke and your mother wrote to you.
Yeah, and he was dead by then, but my mother must have known from her somehow the name of the shipping company I was with.
Mr. Hibberd, one thing I'm curious about, and I'm not sure whether it has any bearing on this case, but perhaps it has. Why was it you made no attempt to contact your parents in all those years? All your life, in fact?
Well, as I say, they didn't seem particularly interested in me. I must say I didn't feel I owed them anything. Well, I really didn't think about them much until my aunt died and I was stuck right on my own.
When did your aunt die?
1974.
And you've not been married?
No. Being a sailor, I've never got round to it.
Yes, I see. Yes, Mr. Dugdale.
Your Honour. Now, you told us yesterday, Mr. Hibberd, that when you confronted your mother on the 20th of June over your father's injuries, that she didn't deny your suggestion that she had in fact seized upon his helpless and paralysed state as an opportunity to torture him.
That's right, she didn't deny it.
Now, you were satisfied that it was your mother who put the caustic soda into the bathwater?
Yeah, she admitted it was her.
And was your mother alone when this conversation took place?
No, my sister was there as well, Joy.
And did you say anything else?
I said the police were involved, and if, as seemed to be the case, my mother needed help, then the best thing to do was to admit to it all and get treatment from a psychiatrist.
And did your mother say anything?
Well, she insisted it was accidental. So I said, well, okay, the boiling water spilled on me might just be an accident, but not the other one, the caustic soda. And I asked Joy to try and make Mother see sense.
And did Joy do anything?
No, she insisted it was an accident too, and said that anyhow it served him right.
Your sister Joy said that it served him right.
Exactly.
Now, did the accused say anything when Joy made this remark?
No. Well, that made me sick, so I left.
Where are you staying at the moment? At your mother's?
No way, no. I'm in a guest house.
Yes, Mr. Dugdale.
Now, during the year that you were here on leave, was your mother sympathetic about your father's condition?
No. Frankly, I thought that she and Joy made no attempt to understand what he must have felt like, paralyzed like that. A man who'd spent his life serving the community, helping others, helpless himself. Of course, I now know a great deal more about their attitudes than I did then.
Now, did either of them visit him at the nursing home?
No, not once. And they seemed to resent my being there every day. Mother was always asking why I didn't spend more time with her. She called him an old corpse once. Said she couldn't understand why I wanted to spend so much time with an old corpse. Joy, well, her attitude was jealous. She accused me of having escaped all those years and then just walking in and getting all Mother's attention.
I see. Yes, thank you, Mr. Hibberd.
Mr. Hibberd, let's get a few things straight, shall we? Your parents had 3 children. Joy, who was born in 1935, Lily, who was born in 1936 and died from diphtheria at the age of 2, and you, the youngest, were born in 1940.
That's correct, yeah.
And no sooner were you born than your auntie whipped you off to Canada, and your mother has not seen sight nor sound of you for 36 years.
It's not my doing, I assure you.
No one's saying it is. But let's get this clear. In all those years, you've never received so much as a postcard from your father. That's right, isn't it?
Yeah.
Whereas, I don't know whether you received them or not, but your mother has sent you a card every year on your birthday, September the 3rd.
One came most years, yeah. Not exactly a shining example of motherhood. Well, not much compensation for having opposed my father after the war when he suggested it was time I came home.
Who told you that?
Father did.
Oh, yes. Before he had the second stroke, when he could talk a little. Fact is, Mr. Hibberd, you took a shine to your paralysed and speechless old father pretty well as soon as you got back to this country, neglecting your mother and your sister. Now, is it a wonder that they were a bit resentful of you and your father?
Maybe it was a bit like that.
You took to your father, but you simply didn't take to your mother and your sister in the same way.
Well, to be quite honest, well, they were both a bit odd, with their pinching and paring. Joy under treatment for chronic depression. Mother scarcely ever going out of the house except on Saturdays to go to jumble sales. From what I gathered, Dad had been a lot more normal. Respected in his job, involved in community work and so on.
You learned that from Mr. Brackenbury?
Yes, Your Honor.
Mrs. Hibberd, I think you were married to your husband in 1934. Is that right?
Yes.
Was your marriage a happy one at first?
No. I don't think it ever was. I thought it was going to be at first, that is.
I see. But in any event, there came a time when the two of you became quite definitely estranged.
Yes.
In about 1976, did you and your husband decide to get divorced?
I did, first. I went to the Citizens Advice Bureau, and then he wanted one. He'd never have let me divorce him, not ever.
I see. You had the idea first.
Yes.
Anyhow, in July 1976, did you obtain a decree nisi based on 2 years' separation and consent?
Yes.
As I understand it, you were still living under the same roof, but separate for the purposes of the law.
That's what the solicitor said, yes.
But in fact, before the decree was made absolute, am I right in saying that your husband suffered a stroke, and in the event you didn't go through with the divorce?
No. I prayed to God, and God put it in my heart to forgive him.
Mrs. Hibberd, in April of this year, Mr. Brackenbury saw what looked to him like a scald mark on your husband's right wrist. Is that what it was?
Yes. I tripped on the carpet and the water splashed out of the kettle. We put a dressing on it and it got better soon enough.
When was this?
Well, a couple of days before Mr. Brackenbury saw it.
I see. On the 11th of June, Mr. Brackenbury observed that the skin of your husband's body was inflamed all over. Now, how did this happen?
I thought it was the bath salts. I always put salts in his bath. When we got him out, we saw that he was red all over, but we thought it was because the water was hot. It wasn't till next morning I noticed. I called to Joy, and then I realised what it was.
Caustic soda?
It's for the drains.
You say you didn't realise till the next morning. Then Mr. Hibberd would have been lying in agony all night.
We didn't know.
Well, what did you do when you did realise?
We bathed him again.
In what?
Oh, in fresh water, with some sodium bicarbonate.
Why didn't you take him to the hospital? Because you were frightened the hospital might ask some questions.
Oh, no. Joyce says there wasn't any point. There was nothing they could do. She trained as a nurse, you know.
I see. Yes, Mr. O'Connor.
Mrs. Hibberd, where do you usually keep the bath salts?
In the bathroom.
And where did you get the caustic soda from, which you put into your husband's bath?
That was in the bathroom, too.
Why? Why not in the kitchen?
Oh, I'd been using it on the basin in the bathroom. It was always getting blocked.
I see. So when you put the bath salts into the bath, you took them from the wrong container.
Yes. I took my glasses off. You see, they get all steamed up in the bathroom. I don't see very well without them.
I see. So it was another accident.
Yes.
Mrs. Hibberd, did you put the caustic soda in the bath before your husband got... I should say, before you put your husband into the bath or afterwards?
Afterwards.
And when he was in the bath, did you wash him?
Yes.
And at what stage did you put the caustic soda into the water? Before you washed him?
Yes.
And how was it you didn't notice the caustic soda? It would have stung your hands?
Oh, yes. Oh, then I must have put it in after his wash, yes, so he could have a good soak.
Soak in what? Caustic soda?
Oh, no. In bath salts. In Bambora's herbal bath salts.
Thank you, Your Honour. Mrs. Hibberd, Mr. Brackenbury has told the court on one occasion you spoke to him over the garden fence and told him that your husband had been stealing money from the church collection plate. Is that what you said?
Yes. He used to boast he made £5 a week that way.
So it wasn't a wicked lie that you made up to get back at your husband in some way?
Oh, no.
You see, Mrs. Hibberd, the prosecution, I think, suggests that these injuries that your husband received were not accidents, but were something which you did deliberately. in order to get back at your husband in some way for the unhappiness of your marriage, to punish him. Is that what happened?
No, there was no need to punish him. God had punished him already, hadn't he?
Mrs. Hibberd, you're saying that when your husband had his stroke, you forgave him?
Yes. God put it in my heart.
Are you a religious person, Mrs. Hibberd? We've heard that whilst your husband went to church regularly, you did not.
No. He wouldn't let me.
He, your husband?
Yes.
Why?
He said I was to go on my belly all my days and eat dust, and if ever I went to church, he'd effing get up and tell the congregation what I'd done.
What had you done?
I'd committed adultery.
I see. And he proposed that if you went to church to stand up and tell that to the congregation. Well, I expect you thought that was very cruel and unfair.
Well, it was. It was only once. And he drove me to it. It was his fault.
I'm sorry, in what way did your husband drive you to commit adultery?
Well, there was no love in him. No love for anything. When we got married, the vicar preached from the Bible, "Be thou faithful unto death, and I will give thee the crown of life." And I would have been, but there was no love in him, no love at all, and he didn't want any. That's what he was like. He took the fun out of everything. We had fun when I was a girl. Till I met him, life was fun.
Where did you meet your husband?
At church. Oh, all his plans seemed quite sensible then. I mean, saving up to get a house and getting on in life.
Yes, I see. Yes, Mr. Dugdale.
Now, we've heard from Mr. Brackenbury that as long as he had been living next door, you and your husband never went for holidays together.
No, we never went on holidays, not ever.
And you would have liked to?
Didn't know what it was like. He made sure he had holidays all the same.
Oh, you mean he was prepared to spend money on holidays for himself?
Not spend money, no. The Fulchester Boys Club, you see. When he went away with them, his holiday was free.
I see. But you never went on holiday without him?
There wasn't any money for that, and he wouldn't have allowed it anyway.
I see. And was your husband always the same, or did he become like that?
Oh, he was always the same, even before we were married. But I thought it would change later. You see, my father left me £100 and we were saving up another 50 to get a mortgage.
For the bungalow, number 16, Glebe Crescent?
Yes, it was just built, brand new, like a dream. And there was a point in all that scrimping and saving then, and I thought once we'd got the bungalow, everything would change. But it didn't. It was always the same.
How much housekeeping money did your husband give you?
He didn't.
None?
No.
Never?
Well, he did at first, just after we got married.
And then what happened?
He said I was extravagant, and he did all the shopping after that.
And had you been extravagant?
I bought a pot of Robertson's strawberry jam, but he said we didn't need it. It was just a pleasure. That's what he said. We could do without the pleasures of life.
I see. So he always did the shopping after that?
Yes.
And your husband, when he went shopping, he bought food for you and the children, did he?
He did, till he found out what I'd done.
You found out what? The adultery, you mean?
Yes.
I see. Now, what happened after that?
He said I hadn't got any rights anymore. I could stay to look after Joy, and that was all.
Do you mean he stopped buying food for you?
Yes, he bought it for himself and Joy, but later on he just bought it for himself.
Oh, you didn't cook for him then?
Oh, no. He used to say I would poison him for his money.
He had some money then?
Yes. All that money he hadn't been spending all those years was saved up.
I see. How much was it, do you know?
Oh, he never told a soul. But I found out later, when the divorce was on, the solicitor told me.
How much was it?
It was over £25,000.
So he'd saved all that?
Yes.
Well, if he wasn't buying food for you, what did you live on?
Well, my mother used to send me food when she was still alive, and when Joy went out to work, she looked after me.
When did all this start, Mrs. Hibberd? When did this adultery occur?
Oh, just after the war broke out. Mr. Hibberd had been called up, but he failed his medical and came back home.
I see. So it was 1939. And it was whilst your husband was away for a while?
He was only away 3 months.
I see. Is this what was behind that extraordinary incident Mr. Brackenbury told us about when your husband asked him to have the milk delivered to Mr. Brackenbury's house because he didn't want you preying on the tradesmen?
Oh, yes. That was the arrangement he made with a man who was in Mr. Brackenbury's house before. We never had anything delivered to the house, and I stopped going in the garden. It was a nice garden once. I made it nice after we moved in. It was ever so nice.
I don't follow. Why did you stop going into the garden?
If I went in the garden, he said it was to show a bit of leg to the neighbours. We had a garden shed and he sold that because he said I had men in it. And it was the same if I ever went out or spoke to a man.
So you stopped going into the garden and you stopped speaking to other men?
Unless Joy was with me, yes. Otherwise he'd have been on at me, calling me names.
What sort of names?
Prostitute, filthy bitch, slut.
Now, let's get this straight, Mrs. Hibberd. With how many men had you committed adultery?
1.
And how many times?
Just once.
In 1939. And your husband behaved in this manner from then on until he had his stroke?
Yes.
Now, Mrs. Hibberd, there was an occasion, was there not, in 1975 when you went to the offices of the DHSS where your husband worked and applied for Social Security. Now, did you do that to hurt him, to embarrass him?
Well, it was when Joy was off sick and we needed the money for food.
Surely your daughter would have had sick pay.
Yes, but we needed that to pay the bills. You don't get much when you're on sick, you know.
What bills?
Well, the coal, the electricity, the gas.
Did you pay the household bills?
Well, Joy did. Mr. Hibberd said he didn't use any of those things, so he wasn't going to pay for them. They could be cut off as far as he was concerned.
Didn't you... What? Electricity? What did you do in the evenings when it was dark?
Went round to Mr. Brackenbury's or somebody else's. He said there was no point in spending money on electricity when Mr. Brackenbury would be using his anyway.
I see. So you applied for Social Security because you genuinely needed the money?
Yes.
Then why didn't you pursue your application?
Because when I went round to the Citizens' Advice Bureau, as the manager said I should, they told me to get a divorce.
Ah, I see. Mrs. Hibberd, are you really telling the court that you put the caustic soda into your husband's bath because without your spectacles you mistook the tin of caustic soda for bath salts?
Yes.
You see, it seems to me that your husband led you a dog's life.
Yes.
Ah, well, I'm sorry, Mr. Dugdale. Please continue.
I'm obliged, Your Honour. If I may just follow up this point, Mrs. Hibberd, would you please remove your spectacles? Now, will you look at Exhibits 2 and 3? Would you hold them both in front of the witness? Now, which of those containers is the bath salts, Mrs. Hibberd? Thank you. You see, you had no difficulty over that, did you?
Oh, I've got more cause not to make a mistake, haven't I?
I don't agree at all, Mrs. Hibberd. Did you buy the tin of caustic soda?
Yes.
And it was you, as I understand it, who used it to unblock the basin in the bathroom?
Yes.
So I expect you read the instructions on the tin before you used it?
Yes.
Yes, let me have the exhibits, will you? Thank you. Caustic soda. Caution, this substance is caustic. And on the other side, warning, corrosive, causes burns. Avoid contact with eyes, skin and clothing. In the case of contact, drench with water at once and get medical advice. For eyes, give prolonged irrigation with water. Get medical attention immediately. You read all that, did you?
Yes.
So you realized it was a highly dangerous substance.
Yes.
So you had as good reason then to avoid confusing it with others as you have now.
And you never think accidents are going to happen, do you?
Mrs. Hibberd, these two are completely different in size, shape and weight, are they not?
Yes, yes, they are.
Yes, well, how then do you suppose that you could have made this alleged mistake?
I don't know. I suppose I wasn't thinking. It takes up a lot of time, you know.
Yes, now these two exhibits were in the bathroom, you say. Whereabouts?
On the basin. They were both on the basin.
Was the lid of the tin of caustic soda on when you picked it up?
Yes.
So you had to remove it in order to sprinkle the contents into the bathwater?
Yes.
Yes, well, how did you remove it? With a screwdriver or with a coin?
I think it was loose.
But you'd read the instructions, had you not?
Yes.
After using caustic, replace lid, press down tightly, keep dry. Had you not done that?
I couldn't have done.
But it goes further than that, Mrs. Hibberd. The packet of bath salts is quite different, isn't it? It doesn't even have a lid. It's open at the top. All you have to do is unfold the waxed paper and pour.
Yes.
Yes, you'd have to be an idiot to confuse these two containers, would you not?
Yes.
Well, wouldn't you?
Yes.
You're not an idiot, are you, Mrs. Hibberd?
No. But there have been times when I've been nearly out of my mind.
Not in early June of this year, when your husband's paralysed body was burned all over with caustic soda.
No.
Mrs. Hibberd, you don't really expect anyone to believe that you confused these two containers, do you?
Oh, I don't know. I hope they will.
Mr. Dugdale, we'll have to adjourn in a minute, but there's one point I want to clarify before we do.
Yes, of course, Your Honour. I haven't finished with the accused's so-called mistake yet.
No, I expect that will take some time.
Yes, indeed it will.
Anyhow, if I can just deal with this point. Mrs. Hibberd, I'm sorry to ask you these questions, but they may be important one way or another. After your husband had found out about your adultery, did you and he continue to share the same bedroom?
No. He said he didn't want me near him in case he caught something. He used to lock the bedroom door. So I moved my things into Joy's room. That's where I've slept ever since.
Well, Mrs. Hibberd, was there not some kind of reconciliation between you and your husband? I mean, your son John was born in September 1940,
No.
and this means...
John was born in July. I've got his birth certificate to prove it. Mr. Hibberd had nothing whatsoever to do with John's coming into the world. The last time I was in bed with a man was September the 30th, 1939, when Mr. Hibberd was away at barracks in Aldershot. That's when John was conceived.
So you're saying that Mr. Hibberd is not the father of your son?
He is not. And it's time John knew the truth.
The case of the Queen against Hibberd will be resumed tomorrow in the Crown Court. In the Fulchester Crown Court, Mrs. Violet Hibberd is on trial charged on 2 counts with having caused actual bodily harm to her paralysed husband. The prosecution alleged that on one occasion Mrs. Hibberd deliberately poured boiling water on her husband and that on a second occasion she put caustic soda in his bathwater. Mrs. Hibberd has pleaded not guilty to both counts, alleging that both incidents were accidents. Mr. Dugdale, counsel for the prosecution, is still cross-examining her.
Now, you told us yesterday, Mrs. Hibberd, that your husband is not the father of your son John. That's right, is it?
Yes.
Is he then the offspring of your adultery?
It was only once.
Yes, yes, you told us that in September 1939 when your husband had been called up.
Jim, his name was. Met him in the bus queue. He took me to the cinema. We saw Charlie Chaplin in Modern Times.
He took you to the cinema and then you went to bed with him?
I was grateful to him. And I remember I had a feeling I wanted to do something really bad. And I wanted to give him something, so I gave him all I had, which was myself. It was the first time I'd been to the picture since I met my husband, and the last. Never saw Jim again.
And I suppose that in due course your husband found out about Jim.
When I was pregnant, yes. He told me to get rid of the baby. but it was too late. He said he wasn't having the baby in the house. So I went to Lorna, my sister, and after John was born, Lorna took him and went to Canada. I begged my husband. I said, do anything you like to me, but let me keep my baby. He said if he so much as saw the baby, he'd take a hammer to him, and I really thought he might.
If all this is true and you wanted to keep the baby, why didn't you leave your husband?
He said I could leave him if I wanted, but Joy was staying with him. He said I got no rights. He could throw me on the street, and because of what I'd done, Joy was his by law, and he was keeping her. I think it was the law in those days. It was then he stopped the tradesman coming to the house and stopped me going into the garden.
And it was after he'd discovered about your adultery that your husband stopped you going to church?
Yes. After John was born, I very much wanted to go to church to say a prayer to God.
A prayer for what?
For forgiveness. I could still have been a good wife if he'd been a quarter of what a husband should be. And I wanted to thank God for one happy day with Jim and a safe birth to John.
I see.
And it was then he said it. And it was an evil thing to say, whatever I've done. Upon thy belly shalt thou go, and dust shalt thou eat all the days of thy life, and if you effing dare to go to church, I'll get up in front of the vicar and I'll tell them all.
So you never did go to church again?
Not until he was ill. No, not once. My mother and father had always seen to it that I went to church all my life.
Your husband seems to have given your son John the impression that you prevented him from getting John back home after the war. From what you say, that simply isn't true?
It's completely untrue. I begged and begged to be allowed to keep him, and he refused. And after the war, we never even discussed John. I should have thought you'd done enough wickedness already without telling those lies to John, trying to take John from me. That's why you can't speak. That's why God punished you again. Better not to have a tongue if all you can tell is lies.
Mrs. Hibberd, you mustn't talk like that to Mr. Hibberd. Just answer the question, starting with this one. How is it that your son John has apparently heard only one side of your marriage, your husband's? If what you say is true, why do you say nothing of it to your son?
Well, I didn't want John to know. I was ashamed of it all.
Mrs. Hibberd, after all these years in which your husband never took you out, in which you never had a holiday, you never had any housekeeping, and after he had made you send your son away, after all these years, did you hate your husband?
Oh, yes. Yes, I did. We both did, Joy and I.
And did you sometimes want him to suffer for what he'd done to you and Joy?
Oh, yes. Yes, I did. I used to dream sometimes I was very strong and picking him up by his ankles. He was never much bigger than a sparrow. Swing him by his ankles and bash his head against the wall. They say you sometimes dream the things you really think, don't they?
Yes, Mrs. Hibberd, they do. And then your husband suffered his stroke, and so you took your revenge on him yourself by pouring scalding water on him and by putting caustic soda in his bathwater, whilst he was paralysed and helpless and completely in your power.
If things had been as they were before, perhaps I would. The very first Sunday he was in hospital, I went to church and I spoke to the vicar after the service because I felt so bad.
About what, in particular?
Because I felt glad he'd had the stroke, and I knew that was bad, wrong. I told the vicar, I told him everything, and he said I wasn't to let my husband poison my life anymore, to stop hating him, because if I didn't, my life would be just as bad as ever. So I prayed to God to help me forgive, and he did. I forgave my husband for everything that had gone before.
Oh, come now, Mrs. Hibberd. The truth is that far from forgiving your husband, you were systematically torturing him, were you not? Getting your own back after years of misery.
No, they were accidents.
Then when your son John accused you of torturing your husband, why did you not deny it?
Oh, John had got it all wrong.
But you didn't say so, did you?
But I tried to tell him...
No, what you said to him was, if you only knew. Knew what?
Well, knew what my husband had done.
So he deserved the torture he was getting?
Oh, no.
Mrs. Hibberd, it was you, was it, who usually bathed your husband?
Yes.
And you usually use these Bamber's herbal bath salts?
Yes.
Now, the salts are a blue powder, and when added to water, they turn the water blue.
Yes.
Yes. Now, the caustic soda. These are white crystals, they're not a powder at all, and when added to water, the colour of the water remains unchanged. Now, Mrs. Hibberd, how was it that when you accidentally put the caustic soda in your husband's bathwater, you didn't notice that the water did not change colour?
I don't know, I suppose I wasn't thinking.
Mrs. Hibberd, when you were getting your husband out of the bath, did you usually have to put your hands into the water under his arms, for instance?
Yes.
Yes. Then how was it that when you were getting your husband out of his bath after his nice soak in what turned out to be a solution of caustic soda, you didn't notice the stinging on your hands?
Well, the gloves. We both wore rubber gloves when we bathed my husband.
Mrs. Hibberd, earlier when His Honour asked you why you didn't feel the stinging when you washed your husband, you gave as your reason that you had not at that stage put the soda in the water. Now you say you wore gloves. How is it that you didn't mention the gloves to His Honour?
Oh, I suppose I must have forgotten. I'm getting on, you know.
Mrs. Hibberd, the truth is it not, that all this talk about a mistake is nonsense, that you knew perfectly well that what you put in the bathwater was caustic soda, because that is exactly what you wanted to put in the bathwater, and that is the truth, isn't it?
No, there were accidents. They were both accidents.
And you are the daughter of Mr. Hibberd and the accused?
Yes.
I believe you're a nurse, Miss Hibberd.
Yes.
But you've always lived with your parents?
Well, no, not always. No, I worked in London for a while, and I have been in and out of hospital myself. But most of the time, yes. I felt I couldn't leave my mother alone with father.
In and out of hospital as a patient?
Yes.
What was your illness?
It was a mental illness.
You're well now?
Oh, I've been much better since father's strokes, thank you. Yes, I feel quite well now. He was the cause of my illness, you see.
The atmosphere in the home?
That's not the medical term for it, but yes, that was it.
Miss Hibberd, were you living at home earlier this year?
Yes.
I want to ask you about a certain scald which your father received in April of this year. Were you in the house when he received this scald?
Yes, I was in the kitchen. It was in the afternoon, and my mother had just come out to get the kettle to refill the teapot. And then I heard her give a cry, and then she called me, and I went into the front room. She already had my father's sleeve rolled up. She told me that she tripped
Never mind what she told you. Did you see the scald?
Oh, yes. I went out to the first aid cabinet to get a dressing. The scald wasn't serious. Mum and I put the dressing on. It healed up soon enough.
Miss Hibberd, aren't you perhaps understating the seriousness of the scald? There's a livid mark on your father's arm even now. It must have been agonizing, must it not?
Well, comparatively speaking, it was a minor injury.
But very painful.
Well, yes.
And now I want to turn to the events of June. There is no doubt that someone put caustic soda into your father's bathwater. Did you help your mother bath your father on that day?
Well, I helped her put him in and get him out.
Did you notice that the bathwater was not blue, as it would have been if there had been Bambora's herbal bath salts in it?
No. I expect my mind was on other things.
Did you feel the caustic soda on your hand when you helped get your father out of the bath?
No. We always wore rubber gloves when we bathed him.
So when did you first appreciate that he had been bathed in caustic soda?
It was the next day. His skin, it was still discoloured.
Why did you not then take him to hospital?
Well, there was nothing they could do that we couldn't. We bathed him in fresh water.
These incidents, were they accidents as far as you were concerned?
Oh, yes.
Miss Hibberd, your brother has said that after your father had been in the nursing home, you and your mother appeared to resent the time that he was spending with your father. Is that correct?
Yes, of course it is. Oh, John didn't know what we'd had to put up with from his father all those years, but, well, we still resented his not spending more time with us.
Well, of course, you can't speak for yourself, but it's your mother that we're really concerned with. Whose idea was it that your father, when he left the private nursing home, should come home and live with you and your mother?
It was Mother's. I didn't want it.
Did she say why?
Your Honour, this must be hearsay.
Yes, but admissible hearsay. It goes to the accused's state of mind. Yes, Miss Hibberd.
What?
Did your mother say why she wanted him back?
Oh, yes. She said we must rid ourselves of our hatred as it was poisoning our lives.
Did she say anything else to indicate what she meant?
There would be no peace for us if we crossed to the other side of the road.
A reference to the parable of the Good Samaritan, I believe.
Yes.
I see. Thank you, Miss Hibberd.
Miss Hibberd, would I be right in saying that you regard your father as the bane not only of your mother's life, but also of your own?
Yes.
And because of him, you felt you couldn't leave home, you couldn't leave your mother, and perhaps even couldn't marry.
Well, I couldn't, could I?
Now, you told us your mother spoke of hatred. Did you hate your father for all he had done to you and your mother in all those years before he had his stroke?
Yes. I hated my mother buying all her clothes in jumble sales. I hated Mother going to the fishmonger and asking for some fish for the cat when it was really fish for herself. I hated him for what he did in all those years and for what he did afterwards, and I still do. I would be lying if I said I didn't.
Now, you said just now, Miss Hibberd, that you hated your father not only for what he did in all those years before, but also for what he did afterwards. Now, what do you mean, what he did afterwards?
Well, there was what he did before and then what he did afterwards. But
Its meaning?
well, the money.
I'm sorry, I don't understand.
Perhaps you would explain, Miss Hibberd.
Well, you didn't know.
Apparently not, since we don't know what you're talking about.
Well, it was over the divorce proceedings. He thought he wouldn't have to pay my mother anything.
Maintenance, you mean?
Well, yes, because of her adultery. And then the judge ordered him to get out of the house straight away, to transfer the house to Mum, to give her £10,000 and to pay her £20 a week. It was the best day of my life hearing the judge passing sentence.
You mean giving judgment, Miss Hibberd? Judges don't pass sentence in divorce cases.
Oh, well, it must have been like a sentence of death to my father. But it was a real pleasure to me. I wish John had been there, to hear the judge telling everyone what his father was really like.
Miss Hibberd, you seem to be under a misapprehension. Your father is not John's father. Well, so your mother has told us, and so it would appear.
I see.
Miss Hibberd, you were going to tell us something about money.
Oh, money, yes. Yes, of course. Well, when my father heard the judge's order, he shouted across the court at Mum that he'd see she wouldn't get a penny, whatever the stinking judge said. And that same day he drew everything out of the building society.
How much?
It was over £25,000. Everything he'd scraped together over all those years, as a result of cheating Mum out of all the things she was entitled to. And then he took out a mortgage on the house for another £5,000. And then he went to London for a week, and he spent it, just to make sure that Mum wouldn't get a penny of what the judge had ordered.
Yes, he spent it on what, Miss Hibberd?
Oh, things he didn't believe in. Gambling, mostly, and dirty films, and drinks, and prostitutes.
How do you know all this?
Well, he said... He sent my mother a dirty postcard every day telling her what he was doing with her money and telling her that he was making sure she wouldn't get a penny of what the judge had ordered. And then the police found it all out too, and they were trying to find out who he was.
I don't understand.
Well, he had this stroke, you see, in one of those clubs in Soho, and nobody knew who he was. The police said that, as far as the club was concerned, he was just another little nameless, dirty old man, which is why the police were called.
So your father made sure that your mother wouldn't get a penny of any of the money that he'd hoarded over the years?
Yes. And if it hadn't been for John paying off the mortgage when he turned up, We wouldn't have had a home either.
Yes. Now, was any of that £25,000 left?
No.
And you and your mother discovered all this sometime after his stroke?
Yes.
When, about?
Oh, about 3 weeks later.
Sometime in September 1976, then?
Yes.
Now, when you discovered this, no doubt it made you feel even more bitter towards your father than you were already.
No. I couldn't have hated him anymore. Not if I'd tried.
And your mother must have felt the same.
Oh, no. No, no, she said we must forgive him. He was a cross we had to bear.
Now, your mother, when she gave her evidence, said that your father, she'd forgiven your father for everything that had happened before he had his stroke, but not afterwards. And this was something, he's wasting all that money, which she found out about after his stroke.
She forgot it all.
Forgot or forgave?
Forgot.
You are convinced, are you, Miss Hibberd, that your mother did not do this deliberately? I mean, putting caustic soda in his bath.
Oh, yes.
Why are you so convinced? Did you do it? After all, you hated him enough.
Yes. Yes, I hated him. Oh, but we wouldn't have done a thing like that.
So just after her husband had had his stroke, Mrs. Hibberd came to see you, Mr. Arkle.
Yes. She'd not been to church in all the years I'd been there, and then suddenly she came. Of course, I knew Reg Hibberd had a wife with whom he didn't get on, but, well, it's a large parish, and I'd never got round to visiting her, not in 6 years.
What did Mrs. Hibberd say to you when she came to see you, Mr. Arkle?
She was in distress. She said she felt glad her husband had suffered his stroke, and she knew that that was wrong. She asked for help. I asked her to tell me all about it.
And did she?
Well, I'm not sure that it was everything, but it was certainly enough to be going on with.
Did you believe it, Mr. Arkle? It's a pretty lurid tale.
That's what she said. The people in Fulchester seemed to think the world of Mr. Hibberd. They'd never believe what he was really like. But yes, I believed her. It all fitted with what I knew.
You didn't think the world of Mr. Hibberd then, although he was one of your church wardens?
Oh, no. Magistrate he may have been, and church warden. But over the years, I'd gradually been reaching the conclusion that he was sick.
What led you to that conclusion?
His meanness. Meanness in every sense. Meanness of pocket, meanness of soul. He was a camp leader for the Fulchester Boys' Club, not out of any understanding for its purpose, but because it meant he got a free holiday. He never forgot to claim a penny he could put down to expenses for those holidays. He was treasurer of the Bowls Club, because it meant he didn't have to pay to go to any of their social functions. He had no interest in bowls. Indeed, he never played. If something was free, he'd take it. You know, I once put a box of apples from the garden outside the vicarage so that passers-by might take one to eat. And I actually saw him come with one of those shopping bags on wheels and take every apple from the box. Every single apple, he took every one. And then, just before his stroke, I discovered that he was taking money from the Sunday collection. He was taking it from the vestry after the services. I was still wondering what to do about that when he had his stroke.
I see. So what Mrs. Hibberd told you about him didn't come entirely as a surprise?
No. I didn't know he was concealing a gruesome home life as well as a grotesque public life, but I knew enough to believe what she told me.
Do you know whether at this time Mrs. Hibberd knew that her husband had squandered all his money and raised a mortgage on the house in order to be unable to comply with the court's order to maintain her?
She did tell me about that at some time, but I can't remember exactly when.
I see. Anyhow, she unburdened her life to you. Then what?
Well, she particularly wanted to know whether her husband was justified in his behavior because of her adultery.
And what did you tell her?
That most decidedly he was not. And then we prayed together. We asked God to give his servant, Violet, the strength to forgive the man who had nailed her to a cross and given her a crown of thorns to wear, just as God's own Son, Jesus Christ, had forgiven those who had crucified him. We prayed for Violet to be released from the burden of hatred, and I believe that she was. She said she felt she had come down off the cross. She said she felt reborn.
I see. Yes, Mr. O'Connor.
I've no further questions, Your Honour.
Mr. Arkle, Mrs. Hibberd said that she felt that she had come down off the cross, but did she also say she felt she was rid of her crown of thorns?
No, she didn't say about that. She simply said she felt reborn.
Now, members of the jury, there's no difficulty about the law in this case. There are two separate charges of assault occasioning actual bodily harm. Now, first, there has to be an assault. In the context of this case, this means that the two incidents must have been deliberate rather than accidental, and you must be satisfied that it was the accused and no one else who poured the boiling water and added the caustic soda to the bath. Next, there must be actual bodily harm. Now, there is no doubt there was actual bodily harm on each of these two occasions. What is in dispute in this case is whether the accused intended to do those things. You must consider each count separately. Now, of course, it is right to say that you're entitled to look at the whole of the evidence in making up your mind in relation to each count. You must be satisfied so that you are sure of the accused's guilt on each count before you can return a verdict of guilty on that count. If you are not so satisfied, then your verdict must be one of not guilty. Will you now please retire, elect a foreman to speak for you on your return, and consider your verdict.
Will the foreman please stand? Just answer the question yes or no. Have you reached a verdict upon which you are all agreed?
Yes.
On the first count of assault occasioning actual bodily harm, do you find the accused guilty or not guilty?
Not guilty.
On the second count of assault occasioning actual bodily harm, do you find the accused guilty or not guilty?
Not guilty.
Mrs. Hibberd, you are free to go.